When it comes to budgeting, most people cringe when they hear the word. And it's funny because being a financial counselor, even people who have not budgeted at all or who have never budgeted have the exact same expression when it comes to really detailing out a budget and coming up with it. In today's video, I want to go through some budgeting tips that are really for everyone. If you're ready to budget, if you're ready to get started, this is definitely the place for you. Now, of course, this is a live stream. I enjoy and I do love doing live streams. If you have some questions, definitely pop them in there. But when you start looking at planning out your finances, there's a reason why so many people, if you're watching, Dave Ramsey, if you're watching pretty much any content creators that are in the financial space, budgeting, financial planning, really expense tracking, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different applications. You can do it old school with pen and paper. A lot of people, like I said, use applications nowadays. And of course, for budgeting, you have to know the reason. That is really the big one when it comes to deciding why you're budgeting. So there was a point in your life when might be younger, might be even middle-aged or even later, could be a baby boomer. But overall, there's a point where you decide that you want to get budgeting and you want to start budgeting, and you have to know the exact same reason why you want to do this. So could it be maybe you're saving up for a wedding? Maybe it's a down payment for a house. You could look at a new baby on the way, college expenses, or you just want to have this debt-free journey sign that we have right back here. That way you can be completely debt-free. Now, this, of course, is going to be very specific to you and you alone, really knowing exactly the reason you, your spouse, your partner, whoever it may be, but understanding the exact reason why you want to do this. Now, this, of course, gives you the why. When it comes to financial counseling, that is where we kind of start, is the dedication to budgeting and getting used to budgeting. It all starts with a why. What is the reason why you want to budget and where are you going to start? Once you have that why, you know the exact reason why you should follow through on budgeting. And trust me, budgeting gets easier. A lot of people, like I said earlier, very cringe when it comes to budgeting. But once you start doing it, and after you do it for 2 or 3 months, if you put the time and effort into it, it comes a lot easier. You'll notice very fast that a majority of your expenses are fixed. We're talking about mortgage payments or rent, looking at car payments, car insurance, usually cell phone bills, internet bills. Majority of your actual expenses that go into budgeting are fixed. The big bucket that you really need to worry about are the variable expenses, the expenses that can change, the expenses that are going to have adjustments kind of month to month, and seeing kind of where you can cut some of those down. But like I said, knowing your why is the big thing when it comes to budgeting. And of course, when it comes to empowering the language, this is where people really are resistant when it comes to budgeting. They don't like the word. And I know Ramit has called it, I believe it's like a financial plan, or coming up with just a different word for the exact same thing. Now, budgeting means that it could be a place of scarcity. This is where I really feel like people don't get on board. When you think of, oh, I'm going to have to do without everything, that is not what a budget is, guys. If there is something you love to do, if it's going to a movies, if it's a hobby, if it's going out to eat, you can do all that and you can do it well within your spending plan and making it incredibly easy and staying motivated to do this. And the reason being, whatever you call it, as long as you can budget for it and it works into the budget, then go ahead and do it. There's no point that a budget says you can't live your life. There's nothing you can do. You're going to be tied down for a year or two, or good old Dave Ramsey, you're going to be eating beans and rice for pretty much forever, which I know he doesn't mean it in a literal term, but it does mean that might be for a certain amount of time, a little bit more scarcity, a little things that we're cutting back of or on to debt repay. When you get to a point of debt repayment and using the language that you really need to understand, when you look at how much money you have, where exactly your money is being used within that budget, and then how much you have left over, that is where the game changer is. Once you can see it, once you can visualize it and understand, hey, I'm making $2,000 a month. I'm spending $3,000 a month. I'm running negative every single month, which of course is not sustainable, meaning that spending plan is going to have to change. You're going to have to see some adjustments. And that is where the budgeting method comes in. Now, when it comes to budgeting itself, there are a couple different ways that I kind of do this. The old school way was the 50-30-20. Now, if you remember this, or if you've ever seen it, the 50-30-20 means that when you break out your income and break it into those segments, 50% of that income should be going to those fixed expenses. like we talked about, this is the house, this is the car. These are things that are not going to change when it comes to those expenses. The next 30%, those are your variables. Those are the expenses that are going to change, whether it's gas, whether it's groceries. Those are the expenses that are going to kind of vary. And then the last segment, that last 20%, is your savings, is your investing, is your debt repayment. Everything else within that type of budget is going to go back and really have a place when you look at the 50, 30, 20. Now, theoretically, what we're seeing right now is if you're in a lower bracket of earning, let's say pretty much $50,000 or less, if you are a single income, 50, 30, 20 isn't working. It's more for a lot of people 50, 40, 10, or it could even be 50, 50, depending on your situation. This is where the budgeting comes in, and knowing the realization of where the money is going. It is really the key to the game, is understanding, hey, I make X amount of dollars. Where is that money going in its entirety? How much do I have left over, like we said, for savings, for retirement, for debt repayment, for a lot of different things? And that can really make it work. You have to understand, being realistic and living within your means can be difficult for an extended amount of time for some of us, but it also doesn't mean that you can't make more income. If you're out there, if you're on YouTube, on your social media, if you're doing DoorDash, a second job, picking up extra hours, there's a lot of ways to increase that very first bucket of your income while keeping that second bucket the same. Now, traditionally, what we see with budgeting methods is a lot of people will see an increase through time when it comes to their income. That means their expenses change. This is keeping up with the Joneses. This is a lifestyle creep. This is a lot of different things that we see, is as people continue to get better jobs, get a promotion, get a raise, get a bonus, most of the money isn't going into budgeting, isn't going into savings. They are splurging. They are buying a lot of things. And of course, living within your means is incredibly difficult this day and age with the rising cost of pretty much everything we have. Now, the other type of budgeting method is what I personally use, which is zero-based budgeting. So what I do, I have my fixed expenses, I have my variable expenses, and then I have that third bucket. Through zero-based budgeting, the way that I do it is I earn X amount of income, I pay all my bills, then that third bucket, whether it be the 20% that we were talking about, the savings, the retirement, the debt repayment, or higher than that, 20, 30, 40%, every single dollar that I have, which is where the zero-based budgeting comes in, goes into an investment account for my future. It is for my future retirement. It is for my kids. It is really creating generational wealth. Putting everything in that savings account is the bucket, regardless of if it's $5 or $500. It is going right back into that budget, meaning that last budget that last bucket within my budget, that is the bucket that goes into investing. Every dollar that there is invested. Now, of course, I do have an emergency fund, fully funded, sitting on the side, just waiting in case there's an emergency, because again, we want this right here. We want that debt-free journey. And you'll notice very quickly, when you get to the point of paying off debt, whether you're using a snowball method, whether you're using a debt avalanche or a snowball avalanche, whatever it may be, when you start paying off your debt and eliminating that debt, you start getting your money back. You start getting your income back. You start seeing your finances align a lot faster when it comes to budgeting, because of course you're not paying all the money that you were in interest. When you start looking at interest, it is money that is gone. You are never going to get a dollar back that you paid in interest. And unfortunately, that is how it works. If you're paying a high interest rate on credit cards, that money is gone with every single payment you're making. There's a reason when you look at your credit card statements and it says, this is now going to take you 19 years to pay off your $5,000 balance. And in that 19 years, you're going to end up paying us $6,000 on the $5,000 balance you have. Doesn't include any purchases, doesn't include anything. Looking at the minimum balance, you are going to pay more than what was actually on the card originally if you're keeping it out for that long. Now, as we look at our next one, prioritizing essentials, expenses, and goals. This is kind of crazy because this is something that, second, third grade really teaches us. And a lot of people don't follow through or don't look at that at all. That is your needs versus your wants. Now, there is a lot of adult justification that goes on when you look at needs and wants and what is really a need and what is really a want. When we start thinking of a need, fundamentally thinking even like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what are the needs in your life? You need a place to live. Now, of course, that can be super subjective. Could it be an $800 apartment? Could it be a $1,500 apartment? Could it be a $4,000 apartment? This is where, again, the justification for the needs has to be there when we talk about like a vehicle. So you need a car. You got to get to work. Very easy. You got to get from point A. You have to get to point B. It is transportation is a necessity. It is a need if you want to earn income. Now, of course, are you buying a $20,000 car? Is it a $50,000 car, an $80,000 car, maybe even more expensive? Again, you have to justify the needs versus the wants and really at what scale it is. And of course, food. Food is a need. This, of course, again, can be very subjective. Looking at groceries, looking at housing, looking at transportation, those are solidified needs. Those are things you need, but it depends on what scale. Now, when you look at the wants, these are the nice to have, and that is really the way to categorize it. When you start looking at things that are wants, it is very nice to have. Like, for instance, when you buy a shirt, when you're buying a $5 shirt at Walmart or a $50 shirt when you go out to the mall, what is the want? You have the need to be clothed, to live comfortably, but at what level? Now, I'm not saying minimalist, going frugal, all in. I'm not buying anything, but you have to understand what the value is of things and what really is important. Is it more important to get out of debt, to build a budget, to have a structure that you're going to be completely debt-free, that you want to retire? Again, thinking of the very first one, what is the purpose? What do you want to get to when it comes to finances? What do you want to get to when it comes to budgeting? And where do you want to be? You have to understand, where your money is going, what things you're happy with. And of course, there can also be things that you cannot live without. We see this regularly where, hey, there are things, one or two non-negotiables for some people. Put it in the budget. Like I said earlier, when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to tips for budgeting, put it in the budget. If there's something that you love to do and you absolutely can't do without it, if it brings you joy, if it brings you happiness, those are things that need to be in the budget. And hopefully, if it doesn't work in the budget, might have to look at another way to cut it down, cut it back, whatever it may be. And of course, when it comes to budgeting, it can also be very short term, meaning once you start getting in the iteration, let's say you do this 2 or 3 months, when you're building out your budget and you look at your variable expenses, you only spend like 10 or 15 minutes every couple of weeks. Plug in what you get from your budget. All of your fixed expenses at that point. Check in and see exactly where you are. Now, of course, leaving room for surprises. This is one that is definitely something. No budget is perfect. And when I do budgeting, when I sit down and I do the financial counseling piece, we put in a bucket, which is kind of an estimation. So we'll go through and use actual numbers for your budget. So what we'll do, we'll pull bank statements, we'll look through credit card statements, we'll look at pretty much everything big picture, and we'll try to forecast what the budget is going to look like for the next month. And of course, we have to adjust where if you're saying, I'm going to use $800 for groceries, and then the following month we realize the grocery bill is $1,200, well, we can adjust the budget and see what we have to do to take precautions really to soften the blow of the extra $400 of expenses that we were not planning in that budget. Now, of course, if you're new to budgeting, if you're new to really debt and debt management itself, big thing we start with, of course, is the budget, but then we get into the emergency fund. When we start thinking of baby steps, when we start thinking of bigger picture, emergency fund keeps you from borrowing money. That, again, from a financial counseling perspective, is one of the absolute huge things. There's no reason to really focus on using that 20% with the budgeting method. When you start looking at the 50, 30, 20, if you're using all of your 20% for debt repayment, just to borrow that same debt back the following month, it is really a self-defeating purpose, and you're not going to get anywhere without really buckling down on some of those expenses. Now, when we start looking at the surprises, though, it comes in the form of impulse buys. So when we start thinking about this, a majority of impulse buys, when you're at a store, when you see something you want, grocery store or retail store, they have a ton of stuff at checkout or something that you were not planning to buy. Now, this, of course, runs about $2,500, which is estimated every single year just in impulse buys. So when you think getting to checkout and you're picking up a Coke, some snacks, spending $3, $5, $7 at checkout at a grocery store, then you multiply that by a couple weeks, then you multiply or, exponentially put that out to a couple months and then a couple years, you can make a really, really big dent in your budget by doing those impulse buys. Now, like we're getting back to the emergency fund and what we were saying, when you start looking at miscellaneous expenses, putting money into that emergency fund first is the big thing. When you think of car repairs, when you think of any emergency that is going to be a financial setback, and again, you got to have the justification for what is an emergency and what is not an emergency. Something brand new comes out, or if you want tickets to a concert, guess what? Not an emergency, not a reason to use the emergency fund. You really have to take a step back and really kind of framework it. What is an emergency and what is this emergency fund actually going to be used for? If you have a vehicle, again, that needs a car repair, if it's a flat tire, if it's something that is truly an emergency, like a medical emergency, dental emergency, that is where the emergency fund comes in. That is where the money is used. Now, of course, once you use that emergency fund, your priority number one goes right back to replenishing that emergency fund. Now, for a majority of people, again, if you're just starting out with budgeting, if you're just starting to kind of use tips to get everything together, start with $500 or $1,000. I know this is not a fully funded emergency fund, but when you start with a small amount, you prove to yourself that you can save money. This is really the very first step to breaking the debt cycle in its entirety and understanding the budgeting methodology and really the reason why we budget, why we stack that emergency fund, or why we build it makes a big, big difference. Now, of course, when we think of simplifying finances, this is a huge one. When we think of automation, technology gives us a super, super easy way of going through. If you download budgeting apps, I know the Every Dollar app, again, through Ramsey Solutions, there are a lot of them. There's Rocket Money. There's a lot of different automation apps that work incredibly well that can track your spending, but you have to use them. If you're choosing to utilize technology to budget, you have to budget and you have to make sure that your budget is updated on a regular basis. If you're like me, I do it in Excel spreadsheets. Makes it super easy, super convenient, because like I said, once I plug in a bunch of my numbers, a majority of those fixed items don't change. When I look at my mortgage, it doesn't change. And for me, again, focusing on that debt-free journey, no credit card debt, no car payment debt, no loan debt, nothing that I'm paying in interest short of the little amount that we owe on the mortgage, which eventually will be paid off. And then it will be the complete debt-free journey in its entirety. But until then, the mortgage is coming down little by little. And my choice between paying off the mortgage and investing, I have chose to invest. I know might be a controversy right there, but I have chose to invest looking at the last stock market returns of the couple years, even paying off a super low interest rate mortgage, not really a big reason for it. Now with automation, you have to be careful. This is where a lot of people do automate everything and don't realize that it sets them back sometimes. So what I mean by this, we see a lot of individuals that automate, let's say their cell phone bill, and they automate, their Xfinity payment. They automate the car payment. They automate their insurance. They automate everything in their life. All of a sudden, they're not paying attention and the automation changes or the bill increases. I just got an email this morning from Netflix saying, hey, we started out years ago at $6.99, then we went to $9.99, then we were $12.99. Now it's going to $16.99. So we have seen an incremental increase. And I know they just shoot me a quick email about the increase of expense that is going on with Netflix on a month-to-month basis. Now that, of course, is something you have to go into the app or you have to go in your budgeting worksheet and actually update and change, making sure that your bank account houses enough money to actually cover the increase in expense. And we've seen this across the board. Streaming services have increased, gym memberships, even looking at car washes and everything else. It seems like there is a crazy amount of stuff that is buying and really looking at your subscription services that wants a couple bucks when you're spending, $7 here, $9.99 here, $20 a month for a car wash. It adds up and it adds up very, very fast, which of course a lot of people can get burned because they don't even realize a couple months. And for some people that I've seen in the financial institutions, a couple years down the road, oh, I didn't even know I was paying for that. Or some of the subscriptions come on an annual basis to save money. Then of course you don't realize that next year when that hits, it really wrecks your budget or can derail it because you don't know that expense is coming. Because again, it was a year ago before you had or last time you had that expense. So make sure when you're automating everything, you know exactly what you're paying for. You have to monitor it. You have to track it. You have to know exactly what you're paying for. Now, when we start looking at adjustments, this is the big one. You have to revisit your budget every single month. Again, once you get probably 2 or 3 months into the budget, a lot of the expenses are set, like we were talking about. Revisiting this budget really does make a big difference. And of course, varying from month to month, there could be some pop-up infrequencies. When you look at, let's say, birthdays that are coming up, holiday expenses, registration fees for cars. I know in Michigan, it's $165 for a car. Because my wife's car is bigger, it is $195. So knowing the frequency of a $400 bill that's going to come with tabs every single year is kind of crazy. And of course, revisiting the budget anytime your income changes. If you pick up a side hustle, if you're doing something like YouTube, like we said, DoorDash, if there's any way that you're picking up extra hours, when you get a raise and your income changes, that means you need to adjust the budget with the increase in income. That way you can kind of build it out. Now, of course, all of this information is great, but if you don't utilize it, there is no reason for it. When you start thinking of month to month, it is really big when you make a family budget. So if you and your wife or your spouse or your significant other is on the same page, include the kids in it. Honestly, this is probably one of the funnest things we've done is I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. Getting them involved in the finances that we have, getting them involved in the budgeting is going to make it super easy, because as they get older, they're going to know exactly what to do, how to budget, what it looks like by the time they get their first job, knowing where their money is going. Every dollar has a purpose. And I really do believe that when it does come to budgeting itself. So guys, that is going to do it for the live stream. We don't have any questions out there, which is great, but definitely some practical budgeting tips. And if you're like me, budgeting on a regular basis, it does become easier. Like I said earlier, when we started the stream, it is very cringeworthy when people hear the budget, when they hear a spending plan, when they hear, something that they're going to have to do in excess of what they want to do. But honestly, when you're sitting down and you're watching a series, you're watching a movie, watching a show, that is time that you could be putting in your financial education. And I know from personal experience and looking at high school and doing the educational piece, when it comes to high school students, budgeting isn't there. It isn't taught. Personal finance isn't taught. Entrepreneurship, investing. There are so many topics that are missing when it comes to formal education. That is one of the big reasons why I started this channel, was being able to get a lot of content out there around the financial space that people are not privy to or they don't have access to in the entirety. So definitely wanted to share these practical budgeting tips. Now, I do budgeting on a regular basis with a lot of individuals. I've actually done this for a multitude of years through a credit union where I work, and I absolutely love it. When I see individuals that are going from a 520, 550 credit score that are having struggles with monthly bills, having struggles with budgeting, not able to really stick to a plan, sitting it down and really going over this on a monthly basis, on a one-on-one basis, really does make a big difference in how you budget. And then we come up with a savings plan. We start building out a lot of the investment strategies. We build out a lot of different things that can be allocated into building an emergency fund and getting them from a point in their life where they feel like the finances are completely out of control, because again, they have no education, they have no experience doing it, to a place where they feel very comfortable doing it independently, which is amazing. And kind of like when you see a butterfly fly, it's for the first time. And then of course, when some of them do come back and say they are completely debt-free, they bought a new house, they paid cash for a car, it is really a game changer in the feeling for me. When I see someone that comes back and they're financially free, it's kind of crazy to think that you can get there. But honestly, through a little bit of dedication, a lot of planning, you can get there pretty easily. So, all right, guys, so that is going to do it for today's stream. Definitely wanted to get some info out of there. And like I said, we're going to be doing streams at least every single week on the channel. So if you like the content that I'm putting out, definitely subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the videos. And as always, thank you guys for watching.